When Master arrived in America in 1920, he went to Boston and he lived there for a few years. And then soon he began traveling around the United States, speaking at most of the major cities. Many groups in different places wanted him to settle there. But eventually he chose Los Angeles as the place where he would have his spiritual headquarters. He said Los Angeles was the Benares of the West. Benares is now called Varanasi, and it's one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world, and is considered to be one of the most holy cities in India. And Master said Los Angeles was comparable in America. Now, he wasn't talking about anything that was visible now. He was talking about the spiritual power that was left in the soil, left in the atmosphere, left in the water by ancient sages who lived on that very part of the earth and whose consciousness still permeated and uplifted. And it makes me think about how many different layers of civilization and how many different attitudes toward life over, millennia infuse a place with a certain atmosphere. Now, interestingly, in the early 80s, Swami Kriyananda gave a satsang in Los Angeles, as it happened, in the home of an author he met named John Ball. John and Pat Ball became friends of his. And he gave a satsang there, and he started talking about the characteristic quality of this land mass, which is now called the United States of America. But before it was that, it belonged to indigenous people, indigenous relative to us, the Europeans who came to immigrate, the Native Americans. We find all kinds of vocabulary for this, which is what we call the American Indians. They called themselves simply the people. And by the time the Europeans landed, the history of the people was that they themselves remembered the higher golden age of their experience on this landmass. And by the time the Europeans arrived, which was really the time when that whole civilization was essentially obliterated by the coming of the immigrants from other parts of the world, but the people actually knew that the golden age of their civilization was past. Now, it's very easy, especially when we look around and see how people are living nowadays, for us to think that the elevated influence of those long ago inhabitants has been lost. But Swamiji, in this satsang that he was giving in Los Angeles, speaking of Master's attitude about Los Angeles and about America in general, Swami just made the interesting comment that it appears as though that influence is lost, but it's really hovering. And as we move again into a higher era in a new way, the power of that people will gradually make itself known, and the vibrations that they left will gradually be absorbed and accepted by the inhabitants now. In other words, wherever high consciousness implants itself, it's never lost. It's just fascinating to realize how different this, even the material plane, is from what we think it is. And Swami said, one of the most moving characteristics of the long ago inhabitants of this landmass was their wonderful attunement to the natural forces. And we see a movement happening that way. Yes, there's enormous disregard for the divine power of nature, but there's also this ever deepening commitment and awakening to bring ourselves back in harmony with it. And that's, Swamiji said, the slow effect of that higher consciousness gradually making itself manifest as more and more souls incarnate who are in tune with it. Isn't it interesting to think that way? Swamiji said many of us who are in the spiritual movement were also American Indians, and that's why we have this longing to live, not if we don't live according to that culture, we want to live according to the essence of that tradition. There's so many things in this world at this time that are very upsetting, that are very disturbing to our equanimity. But we really have to have faith that there is a divine flow happening here, and we are coming out of a lower yuga and going into a higher yuga, and these transitions are very tempestuous. But if those of us who are aware of where the real solutions lie, which is not politics or war or money, but it's attunement. It's attunement to higher realities, to God in nature, to the power of uplifted thought and vibration, to meditation, to all of the things that Ananda itself stands for and so many other groups. Our challenge is not to lose faith and not to think only in terms of the short-term reality of this, but that transitions take time, and whatever right energy we put into it, ultimately that power will succeed. There was a very futuristic thinking man named Buckminster Fuller who's passed this planet now, and he had many futuristic ideas that are gradually being understood and accepted. And when he was toward the end of his life, and very few people were listening to him, he was in a radio interview, and the woman interviewer said to him, "Are you ever discouraged because nobody listens to you?" And he said so cheerfully, "Not at all," he said, "not at all." He said, it takes time for people to accept new ideas. And with Swami Kriyananda, I had a very amusing exchange with him once when things were not going as well as we'd hoped they would go. And I was cooking in his kitchen, and he was in the same dome, but he was in another section of it, and he sort of called across the distance between us and said, "Don't worry, Asha," he said, "we're trying to transform all of society, and naturally that will take a little time." And often when I look around and I see the contrast between the popular culture and what Master brought, and I think of Swami, don't worry, we're trying to transform all of society, and naturally it will take a little time. But if we remain true to our mission, and we keep our hearts with God and our faith in the divine plan, then in relatively short order, everything will unfold as God intends. God bless you.